Good morning. This hearing of the House Democracy Partnership will come to order. This hearing is occurring at a pivotal time. We are just days away from the Summit for Democracy, a global call to action for all who believe in democracy and are trying to make it work. It also comes at a time when questions abound about the health and future prospects of democracies around the world, including our own. As the first branch of government exercising the power of the purse, the U.S. Congress has a critical role to play in democratic development, both at home and around the world. That's why that for more than 15 years, HDP has worked directly with 24 parliaments in emerging democracies, sharing best practices and learning about the challenges and opportunities we have in common. HDP has built on the work of the House Task Force on the Development of Parliamentary Institutions in Central and Eastern Europe in the early 1990s, which supported former communist and Soviet states as they transformed their showcase parliaments into functioning representative institutions. With the founding of HDP in 2005, we revived and expanded this work, still working with Central and Eastern European partners such as North Macedonia, Kosovo, Georgia, and Ukraine, but also engaging democracies worldwide, from Kenya to Indonesia, Mongolia, and Peru. We've tried to concentrate our efforts where they can have the most impact, not on rigid autocracies, but on the countries where democratic transformation is taking hold. This has brought us into contact with excuse me a moment. This has brought us into contact with courageous and resourceful colleagues whose struggles often make our own troubles pale in comparison. We and other members of Congress have supported this work beyond HDP, particularly on the Foreign Affairs and Appropriations Committees. Specifically, we have prioritized legislative strengthening among the development initiatives of USAID and the State Department. Unfortunately, that task is today proving more and more challenging as we confront democratic backsliding around the world. According to Freedom House, nearly 75% of the world's population lived in a country that faced democratic deterioration last year. Some of our HDP partner countries have seen democratic decline, the weakening or outright dissolution of parliament in places that once offered promise as legislative bulwarks. Countries like Tunisia, Sri Lanka, Kyrgyzstan, and Burma. We are not giving up on those countries, where many courageous champions of democracy still struggle, nor should our country's diplomatic efforts flag. But the trend is unmistakable and serves as a wake-up call. Both our interests and our values underscore the importance of our intensified engagement. Moreover, we can be certain that if we leave a vacuum, other world powers and belief systems stand ready to fill it. Russia and increasingly China have proved all too willing to undermine or upend democratically elected governments and to enable the march of autocracy worldwide. Legislatures will probably never be wildly popular institutions. The process of governing at its best is often tedious, convoluted, contentious, and the process is often not at its best. We need to deliver positive economic and policy results that make life better for our constituents, and we must react constructively to criticism, always seeking to improve our performance. These are the challenges we face to our own legislatures and as we support our peers around the world. That leads us as to why we're here this morning. We're delighted to have two prestigious witnesses, Secretary Madeleine Albright and Ambassador Paula Dobriansky, to discuss how we can do more to work with our peers abroad, while also helping colleagues here at home understand the relevance and importance of this work, the importance to the larger task of democracy promotion and development. I'd like, before we turn to our witnesses, to now turn to our co-chair, Congressman Vern Buchanan, for any opening remarks he would care to make.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks for your leadership over the last 15 years. I'm delighted we are holding a hearing which gets to the very essence of our mission. The House Democracy Partnership exists so that the institutions can share and learn from their counterparts around the world. If this hearing can help us do that more effectively, then this will be an exciting opportunity for all of us. It has been a difficult couple of years battling the pandemic, and we've seen challenges and obstacles confront legislatures all over the world. We have unfortunately seen how some legislatures have become subservient to a strong executive branch or the military or other centralized authorities' powers. We've also seen legislatures struggle to regain their rightful authority to serve as a check and balance to the rest of the government. The legislatures we collaborate with often struggle with the same issues that we face here at home. And as you often said, Mr. Chairman, we have much to be modest about, and that is why we have to collaborate and work together long term. We have done some great work during the pandemic, continuously engaging parliaments around the world in a unique peer-to-peer experience, which both member staff and organizations have worked closely together in terms of best practices and holding citizens and the process accountable. Now we must look ahead to the years to come, challenge ourselves to seek and improve our approaches for the betterment of all our legislatures around the world, but also our Congress as well at home. We as a Congress and as individual members have an important role to play in this work and must do more to share our opportunities as well as our challenges with our colleagues abroad. I commend our very impressive witnesses for their remarkable careers and efforts in international development and foreign affairs. I look forward to their testimony and to our question and answer session. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you very much, Mr. Buchanan. Now, without further ado, let's turn to our witnesses. I'll give them brief introductions. Madeleine K. Albright is a professor, author, diplomat, and businesswoman who served as the 64th Secretary of State of the United States and our first female Secretary of State. Prior to that service as Secretary, Dr. Albright served as the U.S. Permanent Representative to the United Nations. She's professor of the practice of diplomacy at the Georgetown University School of Foreign Service and serves as chair of the National Democratic Institute, or NDI, which of course is a partner institution with HDP. We have a very productive and longstanding relationship. We're also very fortunate to have Ambassador Paula Dobriansky with us this morning. Ambassador Dobriansky served under Secretary of State for Global Affairs from 2001 to 2009 and as special envoy to Northern Ireland in 2007. The ambassador is currently a senior fellow in the Future of Diplomacy project at Harvard University's Kennedy School's Belfer Center for Science and International Affairs, and she's vice chair of the Scowcroft Center for Strategy and Security at the Atlantic Council. So thank you to both of you for being here this morning. I'll ask you to limit your opening statement to 5 minutes or so to ensure time for questions from members. And we'll recognize you in the order in which I introduced you, starting with Secretary Albright. Thank you.
Chairman Price and Co-Chair Buchanan and members of the HDP, thank you so much for convening this hearing and for inviting me and Ambassador Dobriansky to participate in it. I have long admired the HDP, not only for the critical work it does with legislatures around the world, but also for the very important example it sets of bipartisanship. And that example comes from the top. So I want to commend Chairman Price and Co-Chair Buchanan for your strong and productive partnership. I also want to express my deepest appreciation to you, Chairman Price. We're going to miss you in Congress, but I know that you will remain on the front lines in defending democracy at home and abroad. The National Democratic Institute, which I chair, is proud to partner with the International Republican Institute to support the HDP, and we are especially honored to be working with HDP in its role hosting the legislative track of the Summit for Democracy. That effort formally kicks off tomorrow when we will convene the first in a series of exchanges with legislative leaders on each of the summit's key themes. And now, with the drumbeat of bad news from abroad and polarization here at home, I understand why so many discussions about democracy are pessimistic and why some question the value of convening a summit at all. For at least 15 years, the pendulum swinging worldwide between democracy and despotism has moved in the wrong direction. A lot of observers expect that to continue. I disagree. I may be crazy, but I think democracy is poised for a comeback. So let me explain why. First, the sense of complacency among those who care most about democracy has disappeared, and with it, the unrealistic euphoria that took hold when the Berlin Wall fell. Alarms about freedom's future are spreading far and wide, and the Summit for Democracy and the activities around it are evidence of that. A challenge cannot be met until it is recognized, and small d Democrats are well aware that we're in for a fight. Second, it's easier to move upward from a valley than from a peak. Many states whose democracies are now troubled were under authoritarian rule until 30 years ago. Today, the world takes note when, for example, the opposition leader in Tanzania is arrested, the Tunisian parliament is dismissed, the president of Brazil threatens to cancel elections, and the Hungarian prime minister rules by decree. Yet there was a time in recent memory when these countries weren't democracies at all. So despite our current distress, the globe is still far freer now than it was during the first 5 decades of my life. We Democrats have an enlarged platform from which to mount a revival. And meanwhile, this is my third point, China and Russia have squandered the best opportunity they may ever have to offer a convincing alternative to liberal democracy. Consider that between 2017 and 2020, the United States pulled back its international engagement and Europe was preoccupied with Brexit and other intramural disputes. The stage was set for Beijing and Moscow to present themselves as global models. They failed. According to the Pew Research Center, unflattering views of China are at a historic high, while Putin is neither trusted nor admired by 4/5 of those polled. And these are just some of the reasons why a democratic comeback is possible. And I know, and you know, however, that should one begin, it will be opposed. Dictators are very adept at shaping public perceptions and checkmating political opponents. They also have the advantage of intimidation. Few are above using force to harass rivals and disrupt protests. Their goal is not so much to change minds as it is to convince people with democratic aspirations to give up. Now, sometimes this works, but we should not abandon hope. We have learned from the past that people and democracies are resilient, that times bring new opportunities, and that even so-called presidents for life come with a built-in expiration date. And here's another key point. Despite the battering democracy has endured, most people want to strengthen, not discard their democratic systems. Having worked with NDI and organizations with comparable goals for more than 35 years, I can testify that there are now more talented women and men striving in more places on behalf of democratic principles than ever before. Despite democracy's struggles, popular participation in shaping public agendas is up, not down. Strides towards gender equity contribute to this rising level of commitment, as does the fact that a record percentage of today's young adults grew up in relative freedom. They consider self-expression a right to be exercised regularly and regardless of obstacles. Polling indicates rising levels of optimism among young people about their ability to achieve social change and to play a role in how their countries are governed. And this brings me to the role of the House Democracy Partnership and legislatures more generally. In a democracy, there is nothing more important than a strong and vibrant legislative branch. It is the reason why Article 1 of the U.S. Constitution begins with the role of Congress. It explains why no U.S.-led effort to spark global democratic revival can succeed without your active engagement. So I would urge you to do everything you can to help democratic forces regain the initiative by rallying friends of freedom around the world and by using your combined influence to support civil discourse, due process, fair elections, and the essential freedoms of speech, worship, and the press. Mr. Chairman and members of the HDP, there is much more I could say, but your time is precious, and so I will now stop and look forward to our discussion. And I thank you very much for having this hearing.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Now we'll turn to Ambassador Dobriansky. We're not hearing you, Ambassador. Are you muted? We're still not hearing.
All right, I think you should hear me now. Sorry, I was trying to work this system and unmuting myself. Can you hear me now,
We
Mr.
can.
Chairman?
Yes, thank you. Please go ahead.
Great, all right. Thank you so much. Well, good morning, distinguished members of the House Democracy Partnership, Chairman Price and Co-Chairman Buchanan. If you're with us, because I can't see all of you, thank you for inviting me here to discuss the vital role of independent and constitutionally driven legislatures and the importance of strengthening legislative efforts. Chairman Price, as a founding member of the House Democracy Partnership, and given the news that you will be stepping down next year after more than 30 years in Congress, I'd like to first thank you for your service. Members, we are living in an era of great power competition. Russia and China are challenging U.S. leadership and influence around the world. In the 2021 annual report to Congress, the U.S.-China Economic and Security Review Commission concluded that, quote, China's leaders have made plain their ambition to present the Chinese Communist Party's one-party rule to the world as a superior political, economic, and moral model to democracy and capitalism, unquote. This year also marked the 15th consecutive year of decline in global freedom. According to Freedom House's annual report, quote, nearly 75% of the world's population lived in a country that faced deterioration last year, unquote. New data from the World Justice Project Rule of Law Index showed for the fourth year in a row, the rule of law in a majority of 139 countries declined. At the same time, this democratic recession has been compounded by the COVID-19 pandemic. Authoritarian governments have used the pandemic to seize more power. Our moral narrative matters. Legislative bodies should continue to work together in innovative ways to foster interaction and uphold our cherished values. Tackling these challenges requires your commitment, dedication, and hard work. I want to commend the House Democracy Partnership for its concrete work and its achievements. Next week, the White House is hosting the inaugural Democracy Summit. The final day of the summit, December 10, marks Human Rights Day. And I understand that this commission will lead the legislative track of the summit, specifically designed for members of the legislature. In fact, the three core areas you're targeting, countering corruption, curbing authoritarianism, and safeguarding human rights, are all crucial. Additionally, in 6 months, a civil society stocktaking of the commitments made at the governmental summit will occur at the Copenhagen Democracy Summit in June 2022. This will afford the partnership yet another chance for engagement. So how specifically have legislatures and parliamentary exchanges and initiatives advanced the democratic agenda? First, I'd like to mention that as part of the Summit for Democracy, the International Republican Institute, the National Democratic Institute, and the House Democracy Partnership will host 4 virtual sessions that bring together legislative leaders to exchange ideas on how to advance democracy through strong independent legislative institutions. And the 4 core areas are absolutely essential. I've mentioned already, one is addressing threats to democracy through empowered and effective legislative institutions. It's also curbing authoritarianism, advancing integrity, in other words, the fight against corruption, and then the parliament's role to defend, safeguard human rights. I'd like to say that here, the partnership is a valuable forum for bolstering democratic unity and democratic resilience through facilitating peer-to-peer exchanges, trainings, and targeted technical assistance. At the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, the House Democracy Partnership organized virtual workshops connecting members of Congress with parliamentary members abroad to share experiences, obstacles, and best practices. As we know, person-to-person contact is optimal, but when necessary, virtual meetings can and should be continued to be deployed. And I hope that you will continue this very aggressive and person-to-person contact. Contact with other parliaments is also valuable for sharing useful information and legislative processes. Exchanges provide legislators and their staffs with a window on the U.S. legislative system and access to technical expertise from around the world on shared challenges. Now, significantly, these opportunities can foster consensus with the legislative bodies of foreign governments. Rule of law is foundational for a free society. Transformative legislation advances change. It can further good governance and foster institutional reforms in countries, providing a solid democratic foundation. We know that legislation that provides reform, transparency, oversight, and responsibility, and eradicates corruption is impactful. It makes a difference in furthering the democratic agenda. Accountability and oversight are a type of check on power, and most significantly on the budget. Members of Congress and Parliament have also
Ambassador, we've lost your audio. Sorry. Ambassador, your audio has gone out on us. All right, let me proceed to questions. We have a number of members of HDP members lined up here, and we'll recognize in order of appearance at the in order of seniority on the commission when the gavel went down, and then others who have joined us since then. And Derek Lighton, our director, is on the line, and he can let me know when we need to again tune in Ambassador Dobriansky. Is that satisfactory, Derek?
Yes, sir.
All right. Okay. Well, let me proceed. We do appreciate the ambassador calling attention. Oh, are you back?
Yes, thank you. Sorry.
All right. Please finish up. Yes.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I'm not sure where I ended, but let me say in closing, let me at least do that in closing. Legislatures are integral to advancing and strengthening democratic governance. And I was saying that I'm very heartened by your holding this hearing today, because we know that legislatures are one of the strongest safeguards of democracy. And I said, to conclude, as my hearing colleague and former Secretary of State, Madeleine Albright, recently wrote in Foreign Affairs, quote, "Democracy's assets are superior. However, because they demand the best from everyone and are grounded in respect for human rights, individual freedom, and social responsibility." Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and sorry for, I guess, a little bit of the spotty connection here, but thank you.
That's fine. Thank you very much. And thank you especially for calling attention to the Summit for Democracy, which does get underway shortly. And the legislative track has been organized by HDP and launches at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. So we invite everyone within our hearing to join us. There will be 3 days of hearings organized by HDP, the legislative aspect of the Summit for Democracy. And of course, then the summit itself will proceed over the next 2 weeks. So we thank you for calling attention to that, and I thank both of you for calling attention to the legislature as the first branch of government. That's of course true in our system, quite literally, with Article 1 of the Constitution. But it's true, we believe, internationally. We often say that free and fair elections, of course, are critical to democracy, but as important or even more important is what happens between elections. And what happens between elections, either you have representative, responsive institutions functioning effectively or you don't. And our mission is to increase that effectiveness both in our own institution and in the countries we work with, because that is absolutely a critical linchpin of democracy. Democracies that can't perform, can't respond, can't deliver are not going to last very long. And that's the job of our representative institutions. In that connection, Ambassador or Secretary Albright and maybe Ambassador also, let me just ask you about legislative strengthening as a specific component of foreign aid and development assistance. We've faced in both Republican and Democratic administrations some questions about how robust that particular aspect of development should be. As you both noted, we have taken the initiative here in the Congress with HDP to work with these parliaments quite directly, and we often find ourselves urging our colleagues, don't just drop into a country and talk to the president and prime minister and go on your way. Engage with the parliaments. The parliaments are a critical aspect of this, especially for congressional delegations, one would think. But there's sometimes a burden of proof, I think, on focusing on the legislatures. We are fortunate to have NDI and IRI and other nonprofits that USAID engages with, contracts with, and they do work on the ground while we engage with the members, give the effort maybe a certain cachet. But I tell you, nothing we do would have much staying power if we didn't have those organizations on the ground working day in and day out to improve capacity in these parliaments. Still, these efforts have waxed and waned, and we are once again faced with the question of how central they should be to our development portfolio, because we're working with civil society, with political parties, with elections, with all kinds of things. And so where does legislative strengthening come in the overall scheme of things? Ambassador or Secretary Albright, let me start with you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I think it's a very important question because, and you formulated it already, is that democracy has to deliver. It's not a spectator sport. There has to be a way that people know that having a democratic government can provide them with the needs that they have. The other part that I think is important to recognize that many of the countries, and your list is great, and I've been to many of them, they're new and they don't really know what the role of the legislative branch should be. And I think that having those of you that have the experience with it go and talk about the importance of that branch, I think kind of lays out a work plan. And I do think if one talks about corruption, various issues that are out there, what needs to happen is rule of law. And the rule of law in a democracy comes from a combination of the executive and legislative branch and judicial to the extent that it works in a number of countries. But I do think that the democracy delivering, I think, is a very important aspect of it. And you go to places and show them how to get the deliverables, what really needs to happen. and how is a legislative branch supposed to work. So I do think it's absolutely essential. I have loved talking about the fact that it's Article 1 time in the United States, and it needs to be all over the world, because that's where the people are really showing what their needs are. So I think you are performing an absolutely vital aspect in terms of making democracy deliver.
Thank you, Ambassador.
Thank you. Let me make 3 points. First, I have to certainly agree with Secretary Albright. I liked your list very much because you had a real combination, and it's also around the globe. The combination first of those that have had more years of democracy under their belt, and then you also have some new countries that are looking for advice and want to look to others. So I felt that the list is a very well-rounded list. It's a list that really adds value in terms of providing information, comparing, sharing experiences. Secondly, I like the fact also, if I may call attention, on your own website, you have a statement where you talk about how legislatures, this is a quote, serve as a platform for a country's most important issues to be debated. You go on to say that legislatures happen to be the voice of its citizens, unquote. In that regard, I think that really, really says it all, because that's the working of a democracy. Not only the checks and balances, but also the fact of the voice of our citizens. So that speaks volumes, and that's where certainly support should be held. And then thirdly, I am heartened by the fact that you do have a key role and in tandem working with NDI and IRI at the Summit for Democracy, because if this issue was not addressed, I think there would be a gaping hole, because this is where laws are made, and laws are transformative. They are what bring about change in one society and encourage the evolution of a democracy. Democracy is not linear, it's ever changing. And in that sense, legislatures have, and rule of law have, a foundational role.
Thank you so much. Mr. Buchanan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me ask both of you, because you've been involved for a long time. As I look at our member countries, which we have 2022 somewhere in there, all of them, when you sit down and talk to them, are either dealing with issues as it relates to the Russians or the Chinese, especially as you look around the globe, and where they're becoming more assertive, more aggressive. The parliaments we work with are, concerned about the impact it's going to have on them. We get delegations of these countries coming through our offices. They'll tell us about that. I mean, you see the role that China's playing, not just in their neighborhood, but in Africa. They're very aggressive and building buildings and highways and just a lot of different things. I mean, what's your thought about, I think back 30, 40 years ago, I was in Beijing in 87. It's a different country. But then you take a look at what's going on today. So as we try to work together, help other parliaments and governments around the world, a lot of them are in those communities. And most of them are very concerned. It's their biggest issue. They're very concerned about, moving forward in terms of them. So they got to find a way. They don't trust them, but they got to work with them. But I just want to kind of get your sense of it. I know it's probably a topic that you get to talk about days about, but just in general, what's your thoughts about that and their impact on our work we're trying to accomplish here, HDP?
Well, I think that it is very important because the countries, including ours, have questions about what are the methods that the Chinese are using in terms of implanting themselves into the business of other countries. And they are using their Belt and Road Initiative. I keep saying the Chinese must be getting very fat because the belt keeps getting larger and larger. And what they do is basically offer all kinds of possibilities to countries that are in the process of development, their own development issues, dealing with issues to do either with health or with the environment or just generally jobs. And I think they appreciate very much knowing that this is something that we in the United States are looking at also in terms of how they are creating what we're talking about is a debt trap by providing various possibilities to these countries that then means that they owe them a lot of money. In the meantime, what they've done is say, and I've witnessed this myself in Kenya, for instance, where we were talking about building a road through the Serengeti and we were talking about some of the environmental concerns. And the Chinese came and said, where do you want it? And basically provided a road that then was something that was counterproductive to where the country wanted to go. And I do think what they appreciate is sharing information with us and knowing that we also have similar questions about how things are working and how, in fact, the debt trap is a trap in terms of the way that they are tying countries to the Chinese without really having improved things for them and making sure that the countries actually deliver. What is interesting, there was an article in the papers this morning where the Chinese are slightly cutting down some of the amounts of money that they're giving in Africa, but it is so much less than the kinds of things that we are doing in terms of assistance. But I do think we are not trying to trap them in some kind of a way where they owe us money without having done what they were supposed to do.
Thank you.
If I will jump in. I think
Yeah.
your question, your point is very well stated. At the outset of my own testimony, I wanted to put this issue in the context of the competition, great power competition with both China and Russia. And I wouldn't only have China on the table here, but Russia. Although Russia is in economic dire straits, nevertheless, Russia has been a disruptor internationally and it's destabilizing certain regions. So what is the value here? The value here and why it's so important for legislatures is first, it is how to come together, not just to only share information, but also to look at ways of speaking out that kind of consensus. It is the moral narrative, the narrative about how there are these unfair kinds of actions, the kind of actions that are taken of economic coercion by China, which are affecting many countries. There's also what constitutes digital authoritarianism, and in which countries want to band together and to provide a kind of barrier against that kind of direct, aggressive engagement in one's own country. The use of the digital weapon, if you will, in breeding social unrest and other kinds of very negative actions. So towards that end, it is the sharing of information, but it's also speaking out, the kind of voice, a consensus, a narrative that I think really matters globally and regionally. And then thirdly, also you being able to compare and contrast, what are the kinds of reforms? What are the kinds of laws that could be put into place that will fortify oneself against such types of economic coercion, for example, and also where there are violations of various trade rules and standards relative to intellectual property rights, for example. No less the kinds of costs, human rights violations that take place relative to human labor. So here, legislative institutions play a very key role.
Thank you,
Thank
Mr.
you very,
Thank you very much. Let me, let me just remind members that we're on a fairly tight schedule here, and we'd like to keep the questions and the answers to a 5-minute time frame if at all possible. Let me turn now to Representative DeGette.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, David. And I have to welcome my friend and Denver native, Secretary Albright. I'm always happy to see you here. You know, the Corbell School at the University of Denver is named after her father, and we're very, very proud of you in Denver every day. So welcome. I haven't been involved with this organization for nearly as long as my beloved friend David Price has, but what has really struck me is what both of you said in your opening comments about how important the legislature is and how frequently it gets sort of forgotten in a lot of these international discussions. When we have talked to our colleagues in some of these developing democracies, our legislative colleagues, it's really obvious to us that they don't have a clear understanding about how the legislature should work in terms of independence from the executive branch, how to deal with money and appropriations, oversight, and so on. I'm wondering if you can give us a little bit of advice as we look forward to 2022, and we hope that we will be visiting some of these countries around the world again in person, which is so important. What areas do you think would help us be able to focus on as we interact with our legislative colleagues and some of what areas do you think a lot of these places really need help from us and advice?
As your fellow Denverite, thank you very much. And let me just say, one of the things my father said was that Americans don't recognize how fragile democracy is and how resilient it is. And I think we need to keep that in mind as we talk about the various issues to do with what you all are doing, because it is also true in other countries as they are looking to see what is happening with our democracy. And I think we need to remember that I unfortunately have something in my mind where I was talking to an Egyptian member of parliament as when we were doing NDI stuff there. And I said, you know, you need to compromise and build coalitions. And he said, you mean like you guys? So the bottom line is there are times that we have not been the best example. I do think that what needs to be made clearer to members even of the older parliaments that are around is that there is a very specific role for legislative branches in order to respond very directly to what the people need, which means that it is important, as it is for you all, to get out and talk to the people that you represent, to really understand what it is that they feel is necessary and what the role of a legislative branch really is in terms of understanding the differences in a society and trying to blend what needs to be done to get the work done. And so I do think as one looks at what is out there, it is the necessity to establish this rule of law, which is easier to talk about than to have legislation really passed and what it means and what areas need to be looked at. And I do think very quickly, obviously, the issue of corruption, but also in order to make sure that there is representation by men and women in their various legislative branches, that it is something that's evident in ours. And I think that it makes a difference in terms of the issues that come up and are seen as important in terms of delivering for the people.
Thank you. Thank you, Ambassador.
I'll give my answer very briefly. All of what the secretary said, I wanted to focus on predominantly corruption. I think this is a key issue for some older democracies and newer democracies. So the importance of transparency, the process of oversight. I think, that's an area where actually many are looking for advice, recommendations, how our own legislative body is set up to provide transparency, oversight, which in turn, hopefully, will eradicate pockets of corruption. And towards that end, one of the areas that I think many parliaments find fascination with us is our confirmation process, and where other parliaments will look towards how do we actually screen those civil servants or political, if you will, political appointees to prevent conflicts of interest, because you'll find not only relative to corruption, but conflicts of interest, that's a process that's actually very unique to the United States. Not many other countries emulate us in that regard. There are some that do, but there are many that do not.
Thank you so
Finally,
much.
I was just going to pick out also the last issue that the secretary mentioned, and I get questions on frequently about how women run for office. And do we have a mandate or set seats? Some parliaments actually have a quota system. We do not. And that's another area that I think many would benefit from learning about what our women legislators, how they run, how they raise money, etc.
Thank you. A lot of us do a lot of that work. And so we will keep doing it. Thanks to both of you. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I think it's fair to say one of our main entry points with almost all of our partner legislatures has been the role of women. Let's turn to Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and certainly I want to take a brief moment and thank you for your service here to the commission, and you'll be missed in your retirement. Certainly, I appreciate your engagement and the way you've led here. Thank you to our guests here. Great panel. Really appreciate your leadership and your insight. I think these issues are so important. I appreciate the opportunity to engage with HDP. These are important topics. I think, personally speaking, it's been enlightening to learn of challenges other countries face. I think it's always important to reflect on our own democracy and republic. I do also have the opportunity to co-chair the U.S.-Japan Congressional Caucus. Obviously gives me an appreciation for the challenges that Japan faces in a neighborhood with China and Russia that, I mean, it speaks for itself. I think that we need to be focused on things like this and these growing threats. I know, Ambassador, in your remarks, you talked about the growing threats posed by China, and I know that the Secretary probably shares many of the same concerns. I'm wondering if you could perhaps elaborate on how HDP can best counter these growing threats with China and Japan. How we can perhaps more effectively use our position here with HDP to highlight these challenges and also, though, work towards solutions that can help our fellow democracies such as Japan.
Madam Secretary, may I jump in?
Sure.
Yes.
Sure. Go ahead.
All right, I will jump in to briefly answer the question. I think we have, and you have, and we have a great opportunity now to address these issues because of the emphasis on the Indo-Pacific. In recent years and right up to this administration, the Biden administration, the quadrilateral security dialogue has been elevated to the head of state level. As you know, it was Japan that initiated, Prime Minister Abe launched in 2007, the quadrilateral security dialogue. And one of the fundamental reasons why that dialogue, along with the United States, Australia, and India, was established and now is raised to a meeting at a head of state level is because of countering the aggression and the threat posed by China. All countries have a very common a very common goal and objective here of looking at it politically, economically, militarily. So I would say to you that I think there is and there are certain institutions in which you can work through. And maybe a creative idea and a thought would be, there were a number of ideas or projects set forth at the summit that took place of the quadrilateral heads of state, and in which they all agreed to work on. It would seem to me that India, Australia, certainly Japan and the United States, its legislatures can come together and can actually discuss these issues and how it can actually come forward with not just only the sharing of information about what's happening in the region, but how best to counter it economically, politically, and militarily. I think there's an opportunity there because of that spotlight and because of that interesting alignment that has been not only elevated, but which is in existence. And I'd add to that, you can also bring in other countries, as a number of other countries were brought in to discuss dealing with the pandemic, meaning South Korea, New Zealand, and even Vietnam was brought in to discuss supply chains and how to deal with the aftermath of the pandemic. So that would just be a thought to you, a very concrete, tangible way of potentially responding to particularly having a focus on the Indo-Pacific.
Thank you.
Let me just quickly add to that. It's HDP is a learning experience for both sides, frankly. And I think that as you come back from various of these missions, it allows you to discuss the issues in our Congress and be able to talk about the importance for them for our mutual relationships, but also the role of the legislative branches. So I think it's a very important learning experience both ways.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr.
Thank
Chairman.
you. Thank you, Ms. Moore.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, and I am just in grief about the prospect of your departure. The House Democracy Partnership, your brainchild, has really been essential, and I've been so happy to work with Mr. Buchanan and Mr. Smith on the House Democracy Partnership. I just want to hearken and circle back to a question, Mr. Chairman Price, that you asked earlier. At that time is really of the essence because we see democracies sort of devolving into authoritarianism right in front of us. And I think while there's nothing that we can really do about the pandemic gripping us globally, it is really the in-person experience that really is essential. And I'm wondering, Madam Ambassador, as head of the NDI, is there a way to at least, number one, take smaller groups of people, with the proper protocols for COVID and all that, because it's nothing like in-person engagement. I'll give you an example. One of our partnerships, and I don't know where it is, with Haiti. I just signed on to a letter because there are tremendous abuses of the supply chain, which we're all grieving over, and corruption relating to that. And they're still one of our fragile partners. And, we really need whatever Senate, whatever legislative structure that is still there to engage with them in terms of identifying political problems. So I'm wondering, Madam Ambassador Albrecht, who I love, I guess that's an aside, what the NDI and IRI are doing to modify so that we don't have just Zoom for the next 2 years.
Well, I'm very glad you asked that because we are constantly looking for ways to keep our visibility abroad. And I do think that sending smaller groups is a good idea. It is not simple given all the restrictions now, but Zoom can only do so much. I also do know that one of the things that we do, both NDI and IRI, is to do election observing and send a variety of different American public officials, obviously the legislative branch, but also understanding how our systems work with local governments and understanding about how to get more people involved. But it's not simple given the restrictions now. And I do think that if people are able to come to the United States, which is up in the air, I think, at the moment, is to basically also welcome that you all welcome them here and tell them more about how Congress works, because it can be a common learning experience. But it is that example of trying to figure out what we can do together. So whenever you're ready, you should go in safety. That's part of the issue. So
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Hill?
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman and Chair Buchanan, for convening this hearing. And it's a treat to see Secretary Albright and Ambassador Dobrynski. Your testimony has been very helpful. And as a new member on the House Democracy Partnership, I understand this is one of the first hearings that we've had in some time. So thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the opportunity to participate today. You know, like Secretary Albright and Chairman Price and others today, there's no doubt our country is lucky due to our Constitution that makes the legislative branch, our first branch, superior to the executive and judicial branches. And our legislative branch achieves that first among equals rank by way of its ability to make laws, conduct a budget in conjunction with the executive branch, the power of a legislative override of a veto, and of course, the ability to approve executive appointments. But these checks and balances and constitutional powers are granted by the people, and that makes America such that shining city on the hill, that power is granted by the people to her elected representatives. And so all of us in Congress are proud of that, and we're proud for the devoted public service of our two witnesses today. And no American takes that constitutional republic for granted. As President Reagan reminded us, freedom is a fragile thing, and it's never more than one generation away from extinction. So we not only have to nurture it here at home, but I'm proud of our Democratic and Republican institutes and their work, Chairman Price, with this amazing Partnership for Democracy in helping nations achieve that same strong feeling and strong bond of connection with a successful democracy. As Secretary Albright noted, we've got to demonstrate that success. And when you think about it, our constitutional republic is a very different animal. Most of our countries around the world are parliamentary democracies, where the majority party also is the executive. And so that parliamentary connection is even more important, that American executive branch and legislative members participate in helping strengthen our fellow parliamentarians around the world, even more important in those parliamentary democracies. And over my 7 years in Congress, I've certainly reaped the benefits of friendships around the world through parliamentarians. One of my closest friends now, David, is a parliamentarian from Kent in the United Kingdom, and we talk almost every week about our work together in the House of Representatives and the House of Commons. And last night, we celebrated at the Kennedy Center the 75th anniversary of the Fulbright program. And being an Arkansan, and proud of the University of Arkansas and proud of Senator Fulbright's initiative to create the 1946 success story that we celebrated last night, the Fulbright program. We know the power of engagement is critical. Let me turn and ask, what can we do to strengthen that sort of outreach? We have technical assistance with countries, and we do that in all range of methods. After the Berlin Wall fell, I worked in Eastern Europe and Central Europe for President Bush and coordinated financial sector assistance there. And we do that kind of technical assistance. But Secretary Albright, how could we really deepen the work of what David Price has initiated in the Democracy Partnership and really make it, as you say, a good two-way experience, but deepen our ability to be successful for these countries that are so desperate to expand their democracy.
You, Congressman, started by talking about President Reagan, who played a very large role in the creation of all of this. He actually was speaking in 1983 to the British Parliament and said that democracies were not real good about explaining themselves vis-a-vis communism. So he came back and he started the Endowment for Democracy that has the Democratic and the Republican institutes, and then a business institute and a labor institute, which are really the warp and woof of our country, which then leads me to be able to answer your question, which I think is that there needs to be more of an explanation of what kind of a role the private sector can play in helping democracy deliver. One of the things I always like to say is because people want to vote and eat. And so I do think that there are ways that can be brought in a little bit more in terms of the kinds of work that you all do. And I was in Tunisia, and it's certainly gone through its ups and downs, but there were going to be a kind of a partnership in terms of looking at how to improve the economic situation in Tunisia. And partially because of the difficulties of the economic situation, they have just had a very complicated time now, where all of a sudden their parliament is not playing the kind of role it should. So my answer is that I think it would be good to think about that warp and woof of our society in terms of linking some of the private sector to the things that we're all talking about, democracy delivering.
Thank you very much. I yield back to you, Mr. Chairman.
Ms. Lee.
Very much, Mr. Chairman. And let me, first of all, just say to you how your leadership of the House Democracy Partnership, as well as throughout the House of Representatives, has been unbelievable. It's been unheard of in so many respects in terms of how you have been able to keep us focused on what the real issues are, and how you have worked for so long in a bipartisan way. And so I just want to thank you, and just know I associate myself with all of the remarks that have been made about your not being present after this term. It's a hard one to come to grips with. But
No, thank you. You're very kind.
yeah, but thanks for giving us the opportunity to work so closely with you. We all have learned so much, and I think the world's a better place because of you. And I think one of the attributes of Chairman Price and this House Democracy Partnership is that members come to this with different perspectives from different regions, different backgrounds, and we are very candid about all of the issues, especially around democracy and what we present throughout the world in terms of democracy being the only form, really, of governance that will allow for people's participation and the lives and aspirations of the people to be achieved. Now, having said that, I come as an African-American woman in America. And we have, and Secretary Albright, we've talked about this a lot, how we promote democracy efforts abroad when in fact we still have our own challenges in America. For instance, the peaceful transfer of power. We know what happened January 6th. How do we give a face to the world that yes, we're still working on our own issues around democracy, especially as it relates to minorities, at the same time that we respect your views and want to work together to accomplish the goals that our country has always had since its inception. It's David, I think this is a more difficult time for democracy promotion from the United States unless we have our own, unless we come forth in a more humble way where we talk about this as we've got to do this together, because we see now with the COVID response throughout the world, the opportunities for autocrats are really challenging now for democracies. And so we have to really make sure that we present our arguments to the parliaments in a way that that parliamentarians in other countries understand that we're a work in progress also, especially for people of color and especially for women in our own country. So Secretary Albright, I'd like to hear now how you view this in terms of how we need to message, promote the policies within the context of our own domestic issues here in America.
Well, I think, Congresswoman, you've presented the key word, humility, that we have to explain, despite the fact that we're the world's oldest democracy, that there have been issues that we are dealing with openly now that need to be dealt with, and to approach it in a way, democracy is a journey, and it goes through a variety of phases, but it's absolutely essential that we make clear that we don't have all the answers and try to engage people in whatever discussions they also are having in terms of multi-ethnic societies or different things that are going on in their societies, that this is something that we are dealing with and that we're dealing with it honestly and openly. And while we may have by the way, I think that one of the things that's very important is for people that disagree with each other to talk to each other. I don't like the word tolerance because it's tolerate, put up with. I think we need to respect the ideas that are coming from other groups and understand why they think the way they do. But from the perspective of your specific question, I think we have to be humble about saying that we haven't gotten everything right. We are looking at things. We are engaging in discussion on this. We are talking about things honestly, and that is the basis of democracy. The other part that I just quickly need to mention is we need to talk to people everywhere about how and where they get their information. That is something that has gotten more complicated. Democracy thrives on information and the role of the press. And if we don't know where things are coming from, we have to ask questions, and they have to ask questions in a way where they also are trying to figure out what direction to go in.
Ambassador, we'd welcome your comments on this as well.
Thank you. And Mr. Chairman, also, well, let me answer, and then I wanted to mention I have a time constraint. Congresswoman Lee, I have to say first, I agree you cannot take democracy from the United States, just pick it up and transplant it on the soil of another country. And I think the way that we share our experience is a value, great value to other countries, but it does have to be done in a humble way. But I would say the reason why our experience is very attractive to others is because we are so transparent, we are willing to criticize, and other countries admire that where there is a debate, there are differences of opinion. And that kind of transparency is the very strength and the foundation of what we're about, that we are evolving. Your question is a very key one in the way we advance democracy, because it does have to be done with certainly a humble attitude and the way in which we approach others. Mr. Chairman, I don't know, I can't tell easily on this screen if there are other members who are speaking. I had indicated I have a plane to catch, and forgive me, I don't know if there are others, but my apologies with that. I was going to sign off in a minute or two, with your permission.
Certainly, we understand, and we had earlier thought we would be signing off as well, but we do have a little flexibility here, I understand. We do have another member waiting in the wings, so you do what you need to do, but we appreciate you being with us today very much.
Well,
and your
if I may just say, thank you very much, and congratulations to you, as I said, on your service, and also for what HDP does. Your work is invaluable, and we'll be looking very closely and supportively at the upcoming Democracy Summit. And just thank you for the privilege of coming today and testifying with Secretary Albright and before your very distinguished members. Thank you so much.
Thank you. We're very grateful for your making time to do this and for your contribution. Let's turn to Ms. Titus.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I agree with all the wonderful things that have been said about your leadership, not only at HDP, but just as a member. I see you as a mentor, but you know, listening to you, you can never get away from being a political scientist. You're not just a legislator, and that comes across so much in these HDP meetings. And I always learn something listening to you, as I'm sure the other members do too, and our colleagues abroad. And thank you for being here, Ms. Albright. I don't know which title to use, and there are so many ones, but it's always an honor to see you. I would just ask about the infrastructure of democracy. It's not that these countries don't have the values or the desire, but they lack that infrastructure. So often we'll go back to a country and it'll be a whole new bunch of people in the parliament. And there's no institutional memory that they have. There's no permanent staff that really learns how to do a budget. We lack the oversight mechanisms. The judiciary is not independent. Oftentimes there aren't real political parties. They're just kind of politics of personality. I wonder if you could recommend to us maybe how we prioritize or how we could do a better job of shoring up those values with an infrastructure that'll allow it to carry on even if the membership of the parliaments change.
There were discussions before that we are not a parliamentary democracy, which does make it different from the others, and that there are changes. There also are many more parties that participate in a lot of countries. So we need to understand what is going on in their countries and be able to provide some very specific advice. But we can't all of a sudden say to everybody, there can only be two parties. And so then the question is what advice we can offer, not just from our own experience, but our knowledge of working with other democracies that provide a work program of some kind. The hardest part, I think, to be just completely frank, is first of all, it's very interesting to be the United States. I did that at the UN and then as secretary, and you have to be careful about the way you approach things and not be didactic and say, this is the only way to do it. But I do think that part of what you're talking about that needs to happen is there needs to be some more systemic way of organizing things and some memory panel in new countries or even old countries that have changed their system to explain what the problems are. But it is definitely hard because they have different systems. And for me, as also a political scientist, going to countries that have multiple parties that change their philosophy, basically, and that are trying to react to totally different situations from ours. So that even, we're the world's oldest democracy. The Indians are the world's largest democracy. And yet some of the things that are going on in their legislative branch are problematic in terms of their leadership. So the question is how to do all these things in a humble way, but understand that the systems are different. And try to figure out what the methodology is to have them be conscious of the importance of information or the importance of actually passing laws that then are in place so that they can operate by those laws. Kind of more general poli-sci, I think.
Well, I'm a political scientist too, so I can appreciate that very much. Thank you. I yield back.
Well, we have three political scientists. If the measure of that is a doctoral degree, we have three on the commission. including Robin Kelly and Dina and myself, we however are a caucus that can meet in a phone booth. It's not it's not a large group. The comments about what we distill from the experiences of legislatures in terms of what we share, what we think is exportable. Those are really important questions, I think. And we have never assumed that that the American constitutional system was an ideal export. In fact, I would think it's not an ideal export for many countries who have good reasons for wanting something closer to a parliamentary structure. But there still are questions of parliamentary competence, some degree of independence, a kind of professional staff support, corruption, integrity, oversight, constituent service. I mean, there are elements that, of course, transcend the precise constitutional system, to say nothing of the basic tenets of the rule of law. So we are always, I think, challenged to distill the essence and to express the understanding going in that we're not talking here about one system that fits all. In fact, we understand the reason for that constitutional diversity worldwide, and the attitude of humility, as I think the Secretary put it, certainly have a lot to be humble about, as I think Mr. Buchanan said in his opening statement, and we're well aware of that, and have. It doesn't behoove us, I think, to go into these countries with anything like a superior attitude. Democracy everywhere is a work in progress. Everywhere it's fragile, in different ways, perhaps, but still, it's something that we strive to achieve, and we have that in common with our partner parliaments. And of course, we use that term partnership advisedly. That's exactly the way we see the work we do with these democracies around the world, many of which are struggling, all of which we admire. Goodness knows we admire them. We admire the work that's going on there, and the courage and the kind of leadership that you see among women in these parliaments. Incredible experience in Afghanistan, for example, with the women parliamentarians, and an abiding sense of concern about what happens to them and others like them. So we really do appreciate Madam Secretary, and also the Ambassador. We appreciate your warm endorsement of what we're trying to do, but also the insight as to how that can be more effective going forward. And as I said earlier, this is a very appropriate session to have as we launch the Summit for Democracy, and particularly the parliamentary aspect of that. We're going to be doing that tomorrow morning, as I said earlier, at 8 o'clock. And we invite everyone on this call to join in that forum, a very important initiative of this administration, which has strong bipartisan support. Mr. Buchanan may have left the call. If he's not, I invite him for any closing comments. If not, we have gone over our appointed time. So I apologize for that, but I also am glad we could do that to include everyone's questions and hear the responses. If there is no further business, I will again thank our witnesses and thank all who have participated, coming on and off this call as we must, and we wish you well. And I will adjourn this hearing of the House Democracy Partnership. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me, and I'm happy to participate anytime you all want to talk. It's one of my favorite subjects. So thank you very much. And Chairman Price, you will be missed, but we will not allow you to go very far.
All right. And there's a year to go, and we're hoping to have a good year for HDP, as for sure. Thank you.